If you've been listening to my recordings, then by now you know I harp a lot on shamanism, animism, because I truly believe it is the original worldwide, you could say, philosophy, spirituality, religion of human beings, and we find the same practices all over the world with different indigenous cultures. For example, the feathered hat, a symbol of the shaman taking flight into the spiritual realm. The feathered hat is worn by almost every shamanic tradition globally, despite being separated by vast distances. The shamanic drum, a tool to sync with the heartbeat of Gaia, Mother Earth, and to bring the shaman into a trance to commune with the spirits. These are all recurring themes, and there are many more items in a shaman's toolkit that are pan-universal. But today I'm going to talk about the Bad Dürrenberg Shaman, known as the Bad Dürrenberg Shaman Woman. Her skeletal remains show that she was about 30 to 40 years old and lived about 9,000 years ago in the late Mesolithic Middle Stone Age. Her remains were discovered in Bad Dürrenberg, Germany, in Europe, and she was discovered in 1934. Now, archaeologists are very careful when they assign the term shaman. In this case, they did assign the term shaman to her because they believe her burial signified a great ritualistic or spiritual role in her community 9,000 years ago. For one, it is one of the most richest Mesolithic grave sites in all of Europe, and there are a lot of ceremonial grave goods that are included in her grave, including an elaborate animal headdress, rare animal remains, fossilized remains, large quantity of red ochre. Red ochre was used typically by shamans in the Mesolithic periods for cave paintings and for rituals. These are the cave paintings we see in much of Europe. It held a spiritual significance, and this red ochre was often carried by shamans, and when they passed away, the shamans of these indigenous tribes and cultures were often buried with a large quantity of red ochre, a symbol of life, fertility, blood, the afterlife, one could say. Now, she was buried separate from any known settlement, and this suggests that she had a very important status, because typically in that time it's believed that if somebody died while in a migration, there was not a lot of time to make a elaborate ceremonial burial ground for you. The fact that she did have such a rich burial ground that was not nearby any settlement says that the people held her to high regard in this case. She was buried sitting in a semi-reclining position with her legs and arms bent, and she was also buried with an infant that was actually genetically related to her as a possible close relative. The most famous artifact associated with the Bad Dürrenberg shaman is the headdress, the animal headdress. It contains roe deer antlers, roe deer skull fragments, feathered decorations. Like I mentioned, globally around the world, shamans use the feathered hat, and it's a symbol for flight into the spiritual, astral, mental planes. And she was also found to have plant fiber bindings on her headdress. So they were actually able to commission an artist, the museum in Germany that houses these remains, to create an artist depiction of what they believed this woman looked like. It's what I use for my YouTube channel profile picture, and this is what she looked like. Matter of fact, this is likely what many shamans looked like thousands and thousands of years ago, especially in Western European hunter-gatherer populations, Anatolian farmers, hunter-gatherers in general in Europe, possibly other parts of the world. She was buried with 50 perforated animal teeth, which include red deer, wild boar, and aurochs. She was also buried with a hollowed crane bone container that within it contained 29 small flint microliths, and these are essentially, think of them as the tip of an arrow. They could be used for arrows, they could be used for cutting meat, skinning animals. So there were about 29 of these buried with her inside of this crane bone container. Some archaeologists do believe that this might have been a kind of instrument of some kind, or a rattle or ceremonial object, and this does align with shaman toolkits all around the world. Whether you're looking at the Amazon or all the way to the steppes of Asia, there was the drum, percussion, rattles, flutes, these kinds of instruments. And music is very important to a shaman. It is how a shaman enters the state of trance, enters to the higher realms. It's like a frequency for the soul, attuning the consciousness so that it enters an altered state of consciousness to commune with the spirits. Alongside the Bad Dürrenberg shaman, there was also a deer bone with red ochre painted upon it, and was very well preserved, the red pigment. It's believed that this was likely a painting tool, like a pigment tool, and a paint applicator for cave paintings or painting on oneself or other objects or persons. She was buried also with several remains of many animals. We know of the crane, the turtle, the wild boar, the red deer, the roe deer, and aurochs as well. So this is usually not found in Mesolithic grave sites. This is why it's considered one of the richest in the world. She was buried with so many items of importance, fossilized remains. Now, they did do DNA tests on her, and they found that she belongs to the mitochondrial haplogroup mtDNA U4B1b, which belongs to the wider haplogroup U4. U4 was common among European Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, also known as the Western hunter-gatherers in particular. In her case, she was likely a Western European hunter-gatherer. Now, this is actually similar haplogroup, the same actually, to many Basque populations. It's believed that the Basque were a mix of these early European hunter-gatherers from this Mesolithic time period. So those of us who have Basque ancestry, we have some of this remnant DNA from these Western European hunter-gatherers, like the Bad Dürrenberg woman. She was not an Anatolian farmer. They came about 2,000 years later when they reached central Germany around that time, 7,000 years ago. So they were able to determine from her DNA that she likely had dark hair, straight hair, blue eyes, and a relatively dark skin pigmentation. Compared with other modern Northern Europeans, she looked probably more Mediterranean in appearance, more tan in general. Now, they also noted several medical findings in her skeletal remains, including teeth infections, worn teeth, tooth pulp exposed, an abscess in her sinus cavity, as well as some vertebrae issues they believe may have led to some kind of neurological symptoms. So the secular world tries to use this as an explanation as to why she was a shaman, that she had possibly seizures and other neurological symptoms that may have been interpreted as being special, divine, or spiritual in nature. I'm just going to go ahead and call bullshit on that. That's not the excuse, although I do think there are physical ailments that could lead one to be a spiritually inclined or sensitive person. Their explanation is materialistic and secular, reductionist. They don't believe in the spiritual. They don't believe in what shamans do. So I say that's bullshit. No, she was a shaman because she was spiritually gifted and was representing her tribe, her culture, her people. And we find actually that she was venerated for a long time, up to about 600 years after she died. There was another deposit into her grave, a decorated antler headdress that was put at her grave 600 years later, which suggests that she was an important shaman, an important person, that 600 years later, human beings still venerated her, still worshiped the ancestor. And that's another common and important aspect of shamanism and animism, is ancestor veneration, ancestor worship. So we see this practice happening 9,000 years ago, and 600 years after she died, there were still other European indigenous populations that were coming to visit her grave to give her offerings for the afterlife, to give her thanks. But this just goes to show the importance of this woman. I don't think many people would ever imagine that 9,000 years ago, human beings were actually visiting the graves of other human beings that had passed away almost more than half a millennium ago from their time. So that's a really interesting thought. Just think about that. How many people go to holy sites in Christianity or Buddhism or Islam, go on pilgrimages to see the remains of saints or martyrs? We're talking about the same phenomenon happening 9,000 years ago, but for an indigenous shaman woman. Now, the infant that she was buried with is not her child. He was around 6 to 8 months old, and he was found to be a 4th to 5th degree relative, which means that was likely her great-great-grandson, cousin, great-nephew, or some other distant maternal relative. They also shared the same maternal lineage of mtDNA U4, but again, she was not his mother. I wanted to show this information to you guys to enlighten your minds and your consciousness and your perception of the ancient past, because we are often told that the indigenous people, the animists, the pagans were savages, that they had no concept of, higher thinking or wisdom, yet we find a sophisticated burial for this shaman woman 9,000 years ago, with several items of her craft, with several items that denote importance in society back then. And she was also revisited, possibly more than once, up to 600 years after her death, and given offerings, likely venerated, prayed to, like shamans do around the world. This is a global practice for shamans to venerate the ancestors, to help their community remember their ancestors. Because in shamanism and animism, you have to understand that we believe that everything is imbued with spirit in nature. All things are conscious. It's called panpsychism. It's universalism of consciousness. Consciousness is fundamental in this belief system. So the ancestors are not dead. They're just in the great beyond. And if you look even closer, there are some indigenous tribal cultures that even believe in reincarnation. And this is another recurring belief in many shamanistic, animistic cultures, that the ancestors will reincarnate back sometimes into the tribe or off to another world, another plane, forevermore. And it's a beautiful belief system, because it goes to show that human beings back then, 9,000 years ago, were so interconnected with nature. They were one with nature, one with the spiritual realm, in which they saw clearly that this is just a plane of temporary existence, but that they understood very well their relationship and balance in nature and with nature as avatars, as we all are avatars. We are all human beings, human vessels for a spirit, for a soul, to have a momentary experience, a temporary experience And back then, they were living in the present moment. They were one with their mother, the earth, with their father, the celestial heavens, the universe, the sky. I'm not saying that everything that they believed has to make sense in a scientific way, but I do believe that dreams, imagination, consciousness, mental reality can be more potent, more powerful, more real than this reality for those who understand how to access it. So that's the Bad Dürrenberg Shaman Woman, 9,000 years old. Very important person, venerated back then, likely worshipped, prayed to, given offerings 600 years after her death. So that's what our ancestors did. That was their religion back then. This is an example of a priest, one could say, a druid, a shaman, a high-level spiritual individual back in the day, and she was a woman, which is a very important thing to know about this, is that she was a woman, not a man, a woman.